they also made me fast. And when I run, I feel God's pleasure. I'm a cross-country runner, and I've run a lot of races. But I can't remember a single race that didn't begin with my dad reminding me of this truth. When we run, if we run for God's glory, we will feel His pleasure. If you've ever seen the movie Chariots of Fire, you know that my opening words are those of the legendary Olympic athlete and beloved missionary to China, Eric Liddell. For most, this movie is all they really know about Eric Liddell. Olympic athlete, the man who wouldn't run on Sunday. But that wasn't how I was first introduced to Eric Liddell. My first memory of him was of watching the story of Eric Liddell in the Torchlighter video series, Heroes of the Faith. I would sit on my comfy couch and snuggle up by my dad under a cozy blanket, and smile and laugh and cry as I watched Eric Liddell live and die for the people of China and for Christ. In this speech, I'd like to introduce you to this Eric Liddell and to show you how through his life he modeled commitment to God's calling on his life, steadfastness to his convictions, and Christ-like character, which never faltered throughout the unimaginable trials of his life. In Duncan Hamilton's book, For the Glory, it tells of Liddell's birth in Tientsin, China to missionary parents in 1902. Another book, Something Greater Than Gold, tells how Liddell dressed in a blue padded jacket and pants, like the rest of the village children, and chatted away with his friends in perfect Chinese. But despite his local dress and impeccable Chinese, a tilt of his hat revealed the bleached blonde hair and piercing blue eyes of a little Scottish lad. When he was only 6 years old, Eric and his brother were sent to boarding school in England. As he grew, Liddell became well known as both a runner and a preacher. He was especially powerful as a preacher to young working class men. He spoke passionately but conversationally, explaining that the best preaching to young men took the form of a simple talk, as if chatting over a picket fence. But wait, I thought Liddell was just a runner, not a preacher. In a sequence of events that only God could orchestrate, a friend of Liddell's, evangelist D.P. Thompson, had the idea that he could reach Scotland's working class men for Christ. Everyone knows a good Scot loves a pint at the pub and a good talk about sports. And there was no sportsman more beloved to these pint-drinking Scots than Eric Liddell. The only problem was that Eric was an introvert and rarely spoke openly about his faith. When Thompson asked Liddell if he would speak to the men, Eric dropped his head for a time, reflected upon the question, and then replied, "All right, I'll do it." The next morning, before he could second-guess himself, Liddell received a letter from his sister, sent from China weeks before. It ended with Isaiah 41:10. "Fear not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." This confirmed Liddell's decision to use the platform of sports fame to share his faith openly. Have you ever shrunk back from God's calling on your life? Liddell sets an example for us of what it looks like to commit to God's calling. Having stepped forward into this calling, Liddell would next be called to show steadfastness to his convictions. You see, the more time Eric gave to sharing his faith, the faster he seemed to run. Before he knew it, he was headed straight for the Olympics in Paris, where his convictions to Christ would truly be put to the test. When he learned that the 100-meter qualifying route was going to be run on the Lord's Day, Liddell refused to run. Criticized for putting his selfish beliefs before duty to country, Eric stood his ground. It was this decision to remain true to his convictions and to his God that truly set Eric apart in the history of sports. Again, orchestrating circumstances as only God could, Liddell was given the chance to run the 400-meter instead of the 100. The morning of the race, someone passed Eric a note from one of the British trainers. It says in the old book, "Him that honors me, I will honor." Here again, God showed his faithfulness to Eric even in the midst of the storm. And it was this same faithful God that allowed Eric to win the 400 meters in a world record time. But soon, God would move in Eric's life. And as only he could, he would use trials to bring out his Christ-like character. You see, soon after Eric's Olympic victory, he would make a surprise announcement. He would leave the spotlight of his Olympic fame and move into the dangerous mission field of China. And so, he set out on what would be his life's greatest works. In 1925, he took the Trans-Siberian Railroad from London all the way to China. Over the course of nearly 20 years, he taught school, preached, and found a wife, Florence. With her, he had 3 beautiful daughters, though he died without ever meeting the third. After decades of internal warfare and turmoil, China was thrown into the horrors of Japanese occupation during World War II. Little eventually sent Florence, then pregnant with their 3rd child, and their 2 daughters to Canada for safety. It was just in time. Along with thousands from the Chinese Inland Mission and many others, Little was forced, in the words of Duncan Hamilton, into a foretaste of hell itself in the Weissen internment camp. In the concentration camp, Little became legendary, and his witness to Christ astounded even many of his fellow believers. As Hamilton writes, Little can sound too virtuous or too honorable to be true, as if those who knew him were either misrepresenting him or consciously mytholizing. Not so. The evidence is too overwhelming to be dismissed as easily as that. Amid the myriad of moral dilemmas in Weissen, Little's forbearance was remarkable. He became the moral and spiritual leader of the horrifying reality within that camp. One man, Langdon Gilkey, who was in the camp with Little, wrote a book about the experience called the Shangtang Compound. In it, he analyzed what happened when men and women are put under extraordinary pressure, arguing that the worst moral dilemmas in the camp came not from the Chinese captors, but from the prisoners themselves. Gilkey wrote of one exceptional individual, Eric Little, saying, "It is rare indeed when a person has the good fortune to meet a saint, but he came as close to it as anyone I have ever met." Gilkey didn't realize what he was seeing. Not a saint, but a man being made into the image of Christ. After nearly 2 years in the camp, Little's health declined rapidly. He died on February 21st, 1945. An autopsy later revealed that he had died of a brain tumor. The Bible often uses this image of a competitive race to teach us important truths of the Christian faith. In the book of Hebrews, we are called to run with endurance the race set before us. In 1 Corinthians 9, Paul speaks of athletes competing for a perishable wreath, but we, as Christians, for an imperishable one. Little received many a perishable wreath in his life as a runner. But when this beloved missionary died in China, he received the imperishable one. I love being a runner. It makes me happy, and I do feel God's pleasure. Maybe someday I'll run in college. Probably not the Olympics. But I share something else with Eric Little. I want to pursue God's calling on my life, to live out my convictions, and to become more Christ-like. God made Eric Little for China, and I am waiting to see what he made me for. And it is in that waiting that I truly do feel God's pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for judging. Thank you for judging.